Brent Bowden. Thanks for having me in your home.
Hey, Matt. My pleasure. Thank you for being here.
We have a lot to talk about your situation. I'm going to try to keep it as concise as I can. There's a lot to cover, and I'm going to try to be as unbiased about it as I can. I mean, I don't want to. There's three sides to every story.
Right.
But you're at present, you're a constable, a police officer with the Truro Police Service.
Yes.
Since, I believe you said 2020?
Yes.
Was it? So last year in 2024, I believe it was in June, there was an incident that came to light sort of publicly recently, but it dates back to June 2024.
Yes.
What happened?
I was working a regular day at Truro Police. I'm a school liaison officer, and I had just returned to the police station from I called the KDA. They were having like a end of the year fun day, and I had just finished coming back to that, and I came back. I was alerted that there was a banana peeling on the windshield of my truck, and when I was alerted to it, I had to go remove it and clean it up and put it in the garbage. And then I proceeded to go inside Truro Police Service to try to
in the building itself.
Yeah, figure out what happened. And I ran into Sergeant Hunka in the stairwell, and I had asked him if he seen anything in the back parking lot, that there was a banana peel on my windshield. He proceeded to say no, he didn't know anything about it, and walked away.
Now, when you asked him this, did you have reason to believe that he did in fact know about it?
I had no reason to believe that he did it at that point.
So you were just asking him because he was the first person
I ran into.
Okay.
And he was working that day as well.
So you say you were alerted. How were you alerted to it?
There was two co-workers that notified me of it.
They physically saw it?
They saw it, and they alerted me to it when I returned back in the police car.
And you're of African descent, yes?
Yes.
Were these white officers?
Yes.
I'm assuming they're officers.
Yes.
They're police officers?
Yes.
So, when they alerted you to it, did they just mention it to you? Did you suspect that they felt there was racial connotations behind it, or was your interaction with them just brief?
My interaction with them was brief. They were in disbelief that they didn't understand why there was a banana peel on my windshield.
Disbelief, just the fact that it was there, period?
Yeah.
Same disbelief that, if, say, it was a coffee cup?
That it was just there, like, okay. That it was odd that it stuck out to them. Did you sense that they sensed that there was any sort of racial connotations behind it, or maybe you weren't even worried about what they thought about it? I wasn't worried about what they thought about it at that time.
And so you ran into Sergeant, who was it, Hunka, you said?
Yes.
He said that he didn't know anything about it. So what took place from there? At this point, had you removed it?
I had removed it at that point. Right. And from there, I proceeded to start my investigation on who put it there. Because it was obvious to me that a person put it there. It was very clear, because that's the only way that I can get on the center of a truck windshield. Right. And to me, it's deliberate, it's intentional. So I started. The police station has security cameras, and I reviewed the security footage. I played it back. I went through all the security footage.
And as a police officer, you just have regular access to that, I would assume?
I have access to it,
without
yes.
having to ask or any sort of...
I don't need permission to look at the security cameras.
And so before you even looked at the security cameras, though, did you already feel that it was, like, racially motivated?
At that point, I was just in shock, and I didn't know what to think at that time, because I was just trying to get to the bottom of it, of what was going on here, and why was I singled out? Why? Because there was no other banana peelings on anybody else's windshields that time. And
so you reviewed the footage the same day?
The same day.
What did you see?
I saw two officers get into an unmarked police vehicle.
Did you recognize them?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
Ed Cormier and Sergeant Hunka. They got into the police unmarked vehicle. I seen them on camera, and they pulled out of the parking spot, and this is out in the back parking lot at Truro Police. And they drove by my truck, and you see an arm come out the passenger's window, and I see the arm come out, and I see the banana peel being tossed on my windshield.
Could you tell whose arm it was?
No.
But when you saw that, did you think that Sergeant Hunka maybe just didn't recall, or did you feel that he told you a blatant lie?
I didn't know who did it at the time until I looked at the footage.
But when you saw it, did you figure that he then should have remembered that it was thrown from the vehicle that he was in, whether or not?
Oh yeah, it was very clear that he should have remembered doing something like that, if that's what you're asking. Yeah.
So did you feel he was dishonest with you?
Oh yes.
Right away you felt that?
Yes.
So then what happened?
Once I identified who was involved, I proceeded to confront the officers involved. And I confronted Sergeant Hunka. And when I confronted him, he ended up at that point owning up to it. And
you told him that I saw that it was you?
Yes.
Or I saw the video footage?
Yeah.
So, I mean, what did that conversation look like? Was it contentious? Was there voices raised? Why did he admit to having lied about it a moment ago? What?
No. So what had happened is that I knew it was him. I just wanted him to tell me. And voices weren't raised. Keep in mind, we're both on duty at this point. So he's working and I'm working.
You're both in uniform?
Yes. He wasn't in uniform, but he was on duty that day.
And you were in the Truro Police Station?
Yes.
Okay. And for the record, he, I guess, outranks you, does he?
Yes. He's the sergeant and I'm a constable.
And Sergeant, or is it Sergeant Cormier, did you say?
Constable Cormier.
So you and he are, I guess, the same rank?
Yes. However, he's been at the service longer than I have, so he holds seniority. Yeah, over me, yeah.
Did that give you pause about approaching them? The fact that one of them held seniority over you and one of them was a sergeant, or did it play no factor at all?
At that point, no, it didn't play a factor because I had enough evidence to confront them about it on the issue, and that was good enough for me at that particular point, because at that time I didn't tell anybody else. And that conversation, I didn't do much talking, to be honest. He did all the talking. And
who was he?
Sergeant Hunka.
Okay.
So he was the first one. He was the first of the two officers that I confronted on this issue. And in that conversation, he stated that he talked about how there was a joke involving a banana peel as like throwing it on the floor and somebody going to slip on it as like an OH&S near miss report, I guess. That was the version that he gave to me, but I didn't see how that related to him throwing a banana peel on my windshield. And He didn't apologize to me then, but he admitted to him and Ed Cormier being involved, and that...
And they were both present during this conversation?
No, it was just me and Sergeant Hunka at that particular moment.
Right. And your relationship with them prior to that, I mean, did you guys not get along? Did you get along with one of them and not the other? Did you have a close relationship?
There have been past negative encounters with Sergeant Hunka.
And that, yourself?
Yes, with myself personally. And the other officer, I try to have as many positive interactions as I can, but we don't directly work with each other, because I was still in shock that I was even having to confront colleagues of mine about this incident. So I was just shocked.
What did he say about the conversation that you'd had just prior to that, where he said that it wasn't him, or that he didn't know anything about it? Did he?
That never came up in that conversation. It was more or less him talking about how
it had to linger, though. I mean, this was not what
it was lingering in my mind. But
how far apart were these conversations? Less than an hour? More than an hour?
So the conversation that I had with him was directly after I reviewed the video footage.
Right. But when you'd asked him prior to that, before you saw the footage, you asked if he'd seen it, and he said no.
Yes, that was probably, I would say, within half hour, 40 minutes of each other.
Right. And so, to folks who might not even understand why you would feel that there's, racist connotations connected with, say, a banana peel being thrown on your windshield, how would you describe that to them? Why did you feel that there was, a negative racial connotation associated with that?
Because I seen it as a direct attack on me by throwing it on my windshield. My truck is an extension of me, and it's my property.
Right.
And
so before there's even any sort of racial connotation involved, the fact that something's being discarded on your property is enough to be offended about or upset about, right? Yes. Why did you feel it was racially motivated? Or did you? Maybe I'm putting words in.
Because, I believe that it has racial undertones where, to me, it says they're basically calling me a monkey.
Right.
To me, that's
a long-standing association, like a sort of black stereotype sort of thing.
Yes.
I Googled, and I'd encourage, I guess, anyone to just, Google racist banana peel incident. There's a number of them that pop up right away. There was an incident involving Wayne Simmons from the NHL, a number of sports incidents, but that were, highly publicized. Is it odd to you that somebody, a reasonable person, a police officer, a sergeant no less, would be oblivious to whether or not he did it or not, but that he would be oblivious to racial connotations connected with, say, throwing a banana peel at a black person's property?
I think he knew what he was doing. I don't believe for a second that somebody that's been a police officer for as long as they have been wouldn't understand that. Because as police officers, we try to hold ourselves to a higher standard. And the expectation is that police have some due diligence in dealing with racial discrimination and equity issues. Right. At least have a basic understanding that the actions of throwing a banana peel on a black person's truck would be a racial act.
Right. And yourself, Constable Cormier and Sergeant Hunka, I believe you said you started with the Truro Police Service in 2002, April. I'm not sure the exact
2020.
Pardon me, 2020.
Yeah, 2020.
The three of you, were you guys involved in there was a very large Black Lives Matter march, rally, protest that took place in the follow to the George Floyd incident. Were you and or they involved in that? I know there was a lot of police officers present that day.
I can't remember them specifically. I do know that Truro Police was present throughout the rally in Truro.
Right. As they would be for any large sort of gathering. Right?
Yeah.
Were you with the service or with the
Yes.
force at that point?
Yes. So I was working that day, and my role as a police officer was to ensure public safety with traffic control, making sure the people that were marching were safe, that there was no traffic trying to get through.
It was a very large, showing of, I guess, empathy towards, anti-black racial issues and things like that. You're not sure if they were present though, but the police service was aware that took place, right?
Yes, the police service was very heavily involved with that. Yes.
So you had your second conversation with Constable Hunka. When did you speak to Constable Cormier about it, or did you?
So I spoke to Constable Cormier directly after I was talking to Hunka.
And which one threw it, or did you know at that point?
I didn't know at that point.
Okay. So what did you see when you saw the tape? You saw an arm, but was the window blocking out who was who, essentially?
The view that I saw was the back of the vehicle.
The back of the vehicle, okay.
And so the vehicle was driving away from the camera.
And did they know that this was your vehicle?
There's no doubt in my mind that they knew that was my vehicle. There's no doubt in my mind that they knew that was my truck.
And when you spoke to Constable Cormier, and when you spoke to Sergeant Hunka, and I may have asked you, did you bring up that you felt that there was racial connotations involved? And how did the conversation with Constable Cormier go?
That conversation went a little different because when I was speaking to him, it was after I was speaking with Sergeant Hunka, and that conversation went a little bit different because he didn't think he did anything wrong. So I approached him and I said, "You were involved in throwing the banana peel on my windshield." And he would proceed to tell me, he's like, "What are you talking about? I didn't do it." So he denied it.
What would you say to the argument that technically one of them wouldn't have been involved? Just one of them threw it. They were together in the vehicle.
They were together in the vehicle, and to me, they're both involved.
And how long did you have left on your shift that day?
That was the end of...
That was the end of your shift?
Yeah.
Okay. So what happened from there?
I proceeded to change, and I came home. And when I came home, I couldn't sleep that night because of this incident and how it affected me. I was upset. I was embarrassed. I felt a sense of betrayal. I didn't know what to do, quite frankly. And at that point, I didn't speak to anybody in management at all. Well, technically, Sergeant Hunka is a senior supervisor,
right, and
I figured he would have taken it a little bit more serious, me coming to him, but it was just my understanding that they didn't understand the context, and at that point I didn't explain it to them because I was still in shock.
So did you give them maybe some sort of benefit of the doubt that they didn't understand the racial connotations to it, or did you feel that they should have, or did you not know what to think?
I was just trying to get out of there because I was so uncomfortable. I didn't say much. When I was speaking with Sergeant Hunka, it was very awkward, to say the very least. And what really threw me off is after he said, talking about how it was a OH&S near miss joke.
What's OH&S, just sort of?
Yeah, something that they had going on that I wasn't a part of.
Okay, so yeah, like an inside sort of joke.
Yeah, and he changed the subject.
Okay.
And that really threw me off, because he started talking about something totally different, and I was just stunned at that point, and I was like, yeah, okay. And because to me, I thought it was going to be a member of the public that was targeting me. I didn't expect me to find out that it was two colleagues of mine.
Right. So after a sleepless night of processing it, did you have to work the next day?
Yes, and I went into work next day. I didn't get dressed as I normally do, and
In terms of where you get dressed?
so like putting on my uniform and my gear, I didn't. When I showed up to work, I just stayed in my plain clothes, sort of thing, because I didn't feel comfortable getting dressed that day in my uniform with my gear. I showed up to work, and I made the decision when I showed up to work that I was going to make a report about this. And the supervisor that was working that day, I went to him. He was busy at the time, and he just told me to give him a few minutes and then we can chat. And then I went in. While I was waiting for him, I had a run-in with Ed Cormier, and that interaction was different. I was in the patrol room. I was talking to another officer, and Ed came walking by, and he was like saying hello, and he seen me, he seen the other officer, and he was acting like there was nothing wrong. And then he proceeded to tell me that, what's wrong with you, Brent? Who pissed in your cornflakes this morning? And he put his hand on me like, what's wrong? And I proceeded to tell him that I was upset with him. I asked him to remove his hand from my shoulders, and I told him that I didn't want to see him and I didn't want to talk to him. And I ended up having to walk away because he didn't walk away, so I just walked away. And I went in and I reported it to a trusted supervisor, and I basically laid it all out, what happened. And that supervisor was deeply concerned.
Was this a white supervisor?
Yes.
Okay.
He was deeply concerned about what I was telling him. I didn't have to explain to him what the problem was, because he understood what I was saying.
Okay.
In terms of the racial undertones, the incident himself, and why, like, that's strange. Like, why would that even happen? Like,
this is another sergeant?
Yes,
chief? Okay.
this is another sergeant.
Okay.
So my initial reaction when I told this supervisor, whom I trusted ever since I started working at Truro Police, and he said that he was sorry that this had happened to me, that should have never have happened. He was telling me that he understood that it was a racist act. He understood that I was upset about it and that I wanted something done about it. So he proceeded to say that he wanted to make a report to the next senior officer above him. And I told him that I needed him to be present because I wasn't comfortable talking about this issue in front of the management team without him. So he agreed that he would be present when I brought it forward to the management team. And the problem that I had was that when I made the report, when I told the management team of who did it, the tone changed.
Now, what do you mean by that? And this was the same day that you met with the management team?
Yes. So this is the next day, the next morning after the incident.
All right. How many members of the management team?
So right now it's just the first level, the inspector.
So it was just you, the officer who you'd spoken to, who you said showed empathy, and, and one other officer.
Yes.
Part of the management team.
Yes.
So it was his tone that shifted when he found out who you were essentially accusing?
Yes.
What do you mean his tone shifted?
So as soon as I said the names Sergeant Hunka and Ed Cormier, it was like he wasn't shocked that he was hearing those names after the story that I was telling. And then he proceeded to tell me that he was aware of a joke that was going around involving banana peelings in this OH&S concern that I was telling you about earlier, that Sergeant Hunka told me about.
Had other officers had banana peels thrown on their vehicles?
Not that I'm aware of. Okay. And then I had to explain to management basically what the problem was. So I explained the historical concept of the banana and monkeys and apes, how it relates to black people.
Being related to black people.
Yeah,
in a negative
undertone.
racist sort of way, right?
And he was like, okay. And then he was asking me questions, and he's like, oh, you looked at the cameras? I was like, yeah. I was like, I spoke to Ed and Hunka about it. They lied initially, and then Hunka eventually owned up to it but never apologized. And then he stated that he was going to look into it, and that he alluded to the fact that he was going to alert the chief and the deputy chief about the incident. Right. So from there, I believe he did his own investigation and made a report to the deputy chief and the chief, and not all on the same day, but I ended up meeting with the deputy chief, and I told the deputy chief everything, and I broke down crying in front of him in his office, telling him my story.
This was days later?
This was within the same time frame. I can't recall if it was the same day or it was a day or two after.
Right. You say you broke into tears just explaining it to, you said it was the deputy chief?
The deputy chief.
Right.
And I just told him how it was, I considered it to be a racist act against me that basically called me a monkey.
Did you feel he had a sense, like you said, the first person you spoke to, they sort of understood without you having to explain it?
I didn't have to explain a thing to the first supervisor that I brought it to, but I had to explain it to the first manager.
Right.
And I don't know if the deputy chief knew, but he didn't ask me to explain it, but I did acknowledge that.
You just said, let me just explain it, just...
when I was talking to him.
Off the rip. Okay.
And
so did he then discipline the other officers? Did he bring you guys together? What not to rush you along or anything like that, but
so what happened after I spoke with the deputy chief he took some notes. He didn't say too much. He was letting me talk. And
from his perspective, he still has to check all sides of the story.
Right. The end result of that conversation was that I took away from it is that he was going to be having a conversation with the chief about what I told him and what he has been given by the other manager. And then
did he plan to review the tape, or had he reviewed it at that point?
I don't know if the deputy chief reviewed the tape. From what I recall is that the first manager reviewed it and possibly did a report and then gave it to the deputy chief.
So the deputy chief essentially doesn't have any real quote-unquote reason to review it. He accepts it.
Right.
You say you saw the tape is fact based off of the other investigator.
Yes.
Yes.
So I have no doubt in my mind that eventually the deputy chief and the chief actually reviewed it themselves at some point. But at that point, I believe he was just going based on the information that I gave him and the other manager gave to him.
Right.
So the end result of that was that I was going to meet with him and the chief about the whole incident.
The deputy chief and the chief?
Yes.
Okay.
So this wasn't in the same day, but it was another day. I came back into work, and during this time, I wasn't able to work because I didn't feel comfortable being there. Like I wasn't working at all.
And you hadn't slept.
I had trouble sleeping for sure because it still upsets me to this day.
Did you feel it affected your ability to make, I guess, rational decisions in the field? Did you feel that it jeopardized your safety? You think you needed to call for backup in a dangerous situation, or was it all of those things? Maybe something completely different.
Everything was going through my mind at that point, but what I was focused on was that I was in shock, and I was in this sense of betrayal by my colleagues that they would do something like this. But more so from what I seen in their actions in the security video. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is how they drove out, they threw it on my windshield, they left, they came back and drove by it again and didn't remove it.
And then you say at least one of them lied to you about it. Did anything go through your mind, and it maybe didn't, but in terms of in the town of Truro itself, there's a black community that goes back, I want to say, more than 100 years. Was there any thought or concerning your mind that, what an interaction between one of those officers and, say, a member of the public who's of African descent?
I have no idea about that. However,
what would you say to a member of the public who would say, well, that is deeply concerning, and maybe if they're willing to do that to a black officer, it should be without question that makes them unfit for duty.
Right.
I mean, you're still a member of the force. It's hard. We're here. I can't not ask you that, right?
What I can say is that police officers are expected to hold themselves to a higher standard, regardless of who you're dealing with or what crisis you're dealing with. All police officers are sworn under oath to have integrity, courage, and serve with honor. And I can't speak to what they may or may not have done. I can't speak to that.
But this happened, like you said, back in June of 2024.
Right.
We're now February 2025, Black History Month. Why are we still talking about it? What happened with the chief and the deputy chief? Did they resolve? Obviously, they didn't resolve it, or to your satisfaction, I would think. What happened next?
So the chief decided that he wanted everybody to have a sit-down meeting to talk about it. he wanted the officers involved to hear how I felt. At first I didn't feel comfortable about it. But that was the only option that I was given at that point.
So I'm assuming that meeting did take place. In that meeting, did, not to jump ahead, but did Sergeant Hunka, did he acknowledge having initially lied about it?
No, that wasn't discussed.
So a meeting eventually did take place?
A meeting did take place.
Who was all there? What did that look like?
There was 2 meetings, actually. So the first meeting, the only reason why I agreed to it is because I wanted somebody there as a witness. So the chief and I agreed that a member of the local African Nova Scotian community would be present, and the purpose of their presence was not to give an opinion on the matter. However, their purpose there was to support me.
Was it someone who you selected or someone that somebody else selected?
It was a mutual agreement between the chief and I. So that was the reason why I agreed to the sit down. And because
whose idea was it?
It was the chief's idea.
Okay.
So then I agreed to it, and I also asked a fellow officer to be there as a witness whom I trusted as well.
And we've talked a bit about this off camera. We haven't talked about that or who the person was. I don't even know who it was.
Yeah.
Was it someone who you knew though? Were you familiar with the person?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And that was the only way that I felt comfortable about bringing this forward, because I had nobody in my corner for support, emotional support, I guess. And that was the biggest reason why these 2 people were present. And
no lawyers present on your behalf or their behalf?
No.
Okay.
The only other person that I requested was Human Resources for the town of Truro, because I wanted to make sure that there was witnesses to what was going on. So this meeting happened, and it was basically me telling my story. And I told my story, and the chief and the human resource people, they concluded that we're going to have a sit down with the 2 officers. We're going to schedule that. And
so they weren't in that meeting?
No.
Okay.
No. So the following, or a couple days later, we ended up having a sit down with those officers.
The same people from the first meeting, were they in it as well?
No. So my colleague of mine, another officer, they weren't present in the second meeting, but the community member that was there to support me was.
Present in both meetings.
And the chief, the deputy chief, and the inspector were all present for this meeting, along with Sergeant Hunka and Ed Cormier.
What is Sergeant Hunka's first name? I don't know if I asked.
I believe it's John.
Okay. And so how did that meeting go? I know I keep cutting.
Yeah. So that meeting was very difficult. I was emotionally upset the whole time. I had trouble even going to that meeting, knowing that I had to face these officers in the same room, and I was very uncomfortable with that. However, I still agreed to it because I thought we could come to some sort of resolution to this whole matter, and I said a little bit of my story. We tried to start it off as establishing the issue and what happened, and then everybody had their own opportunity to speak. I can remember the deputy chief talking about how the whole incident was a joke with OH&S, that a near miss slip that was going on.
Like something like slipping on a banana peel.
Yeah, like on something to that effect.
I'd really be interested in hearing their specific
Yeah.
explanation of this inside joke.
Yeah.
Sorry, continue.
And then Sergeant Hunka spoke. He ended up apologizing for doing it. But at that point, it didn't matter to me that he was apologizing, because I already gave him 2 opportunities before that to apologize, and he never did until that meeting.
Did you feel this apology was genuine?
I feel that it was forced and that he had no other option. I didn't accept his apology. I got upset when, after he was done talking, I got upset with him. I was like, you're only apologizing because you have to. And the only reason why you're here is because I caught you on camera doing this. And if I didn't have that evidence to support this, then I would have nothing to go on, because the video evidence was the primary underlying piece of evidence that shows everything.
They had to have known they would have been on camera doing that, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe to their argument, well, that's why it wasn't that big of a deal, because we knew we were on camera. We didn't, even though we lied.
I don't know.
Right.
Then Ed Cormier spoke, and he made me even more upset in this meeting, because when he spoke, he almost went on the offense where he was asking, like, Brent, do you think I'm a racist? And he didn't really understand what he was even doing there in the meeting, because, well, I didn't throw it. What am I doing here?
At that point, had it been determined who had thrown it?
Yes.
It was
Sergeant Hunka.
Okay.
And with just his sheer attitude that he displayed to me at that moment, I was so emotionally upset of what he was saying that I didn't want to talk. So I asked the community member at that particular moment, if he would please speak on my behalf to explain to him the racial context of what happened.
Do you feel that they did a good job in explaining?
The community member did, yes.
Okay. Should it have been, or was it then more clear to Constable Cormier after that explanation?
After that explanation, I think it was more clear to everybody involved in that meeting, because it was explained in such detail. And keep in mind, this community member wasn't placing blame on anybody. That community member was just there to support me, and I asked them to speak on the context of the incident itself. And that's it.
If it happened just too generic?
Yes.
What
Yes.
Okay.
So at no time did that community member point the finger or give an opinion on the matter.
Did then Sergeant Hunka or Constable Cormier, did they then express more, say, remorse at that point? Did a light go off to them at that point, and then maybe they gave you a more meaningful apology?
I don't think so. I think Sergeant Hunka at that point was starting to realize, but I don't think Ed Cormier was. I think he was still under the impression that he was the one under scrutiny here, and he didn't understand why. Yeah. But Sergeant Hunka, the way he explained it, that he was talking about how he was going to go remove it later on that morning, but I already removed it.
But did you get the impression that he maybe did have a sense as to why, like initially, why you were upset and the racial connotations behind it, and maybe that's why he lied?
No. I didn't I didn't get that from him at all. All that I got from what he said is that he apologized for doing it, and he ended up mentioning that how hard it must be for me to bring this forward because I'm making a complaint against a supervisor because he's a supervisor.
Now, was that sort of a veiled threat? Did you take it that way?
No, I didn't take that as a threat. I think he was actually starting to think about his actions and how it was making me feel at that point.
And so in that meeting, were you on medical leave at that point? When did you go on medical leave? And why are you still on medical leave? How did we get from there to here?
So the reason why I'm not working is because I don't have a respectful workplace to work in because of these two officers.
And did that take place after that meeting, or were you already...
I was already off. So at that time, I was using my sick time.
Okay.
So at the end of it, the chief spoke, and the chief talked about how he was going to implement training to the rest of the department. He started talking about other things that he was going to do to bring the situation to light and educate officers on it. And when he was talking, I was really offended by what he was saying because to me, he had an opportunity to do something about this and he just deflected away from the issue altogether.
How so?
Because he was talking about what he was going to do moving forward, but that didn't include the two officers that did it, that were involved.
In terms of disciplinary action?
Right.
Did they ever receive any sort of disciplinary action?
As far as I know, nothing has been done. Nothing. Zero.
Do you think they should be demoted, removed from the force? What is the minimum you think should happen? What is the maximum you think should happen? What do you think should happen? Maybe somewhere in the middle. Maybe it's...
So at that time, I didn't make a decision on what disciplinary action should be taken against these two officers.
But this was months ago. You've had time
Yes.
to process that.
Yes. Right now, after everything that has gone on, I believe that those two officers don't deserve to be police officers. I told them that in our sit-down meeting, that they tried to cover it up. I caught them. They should be charged. They should be released because they're not holding themselves to a standard of high integrity. And if roles were reversed, I would expect to be held accountable too for my actions. If I'm doing wrong as a police officer, I expect to be held accountable. But that's the part that I get into where it comes down to your own personal integrity. Are you willing to do the right thing when nobody else is looking?
Character.
Yeah. So to me, that just threw everything away about what a police officer is all about.
And to circle back to this sort of a point that I sort of touched on earlier, I guess I'll ask it in this way. Do you think it's unreasonable then for someone who would take your word for everything you're saying, to think that it would be reasonable to suspect that if they were to lie about their actions towards a fellow police officer, that they would maybe lie about an interaction that takes place with a member of the public while they're on duty?
I would say that's possible, yes.
Would you be surprised to hear that something like that was accused or had taken place, based on your experience?
On my experience, from looking at it at that perspective, maybe. However, I expect the same of all police officers, that when they are conducting themselves in the community, that it's done to a high standards of respect, integrity, and courage.
This all sort of came to light publicly recently through a series of social media posts. Your wife made a post about the situation.
Yes.
One of the things that she said in that was that, and I want to make sure I don't misquote it. She said that the chief of police, Dave McNeil, quote, jokingly stated, quote, "Imagine if this got out." Why did she make that statement? I know you can't necessarily speak for her, but that sort of jumped off the page to me.
That was what the chief said at the very end of the meeting to the community member that was with me, and he laughed about it.
What was your reaction to that? What was the community member's reaction? I mean, you can't speak for the community member necessarily, maybe.
I can speak for myself, and I took that as a direct insult to everything that just happened in the meeting, that I was being ignored. That everybody was listening, everybody heard what I had to say, but I was being ignored. That it wasn't being taken seriously.
And you heard him say, quote, "Imagine if this got out."
I
joking.
I heard him say that. Yes.
So, is this? I don't even know where to go. Like, what happened then? I guess from there, between then and now, you didn't go back to work.
I didn't go back to work.
Why is this coming to light now?
Because the reason why this is coming to light now is because I gave all proper avenues a chance to right the wrong with what was going on. Unfortunately, those channels didn't work. And because they didn't work, they weren't satisfactory, because I believed that then some sort of disciplinary action had to come from them committing this incident against me. The fact that nothing was done speaks to me being ignored. It speaks to the lack of accountability. It speaks to a double standard where if I was in that situation, I would probably be disciplined. But these two officers don't get any disciplinary measures. Whether that's a strong disciplinary measure or a very weak disciplinary measure, there had to be something. Having the chief talk to these two officers about their behavior wasn't enough for me. I specifically asked the chief, human resources, the deputy chief, and the inspector for disciplinary measures, and nothing was done.
When's the last time you spoke to them? Or was that the last time you spoke to them when you asked them about the additional disciplinary measures?
A few days had passed after the sit-down meeting with everybody, and I didn't hear anything. So I reached out to human resources and asked for an update. What's happening? What's going on? And the chief and the deputy chief were included in that email. I spoke to how I wasn't satisfied with the meeting. I expressed my concerns that there was more emphasis in that meeting for me to return to work. And the officers and I just go our separate ways. But
there's a shootout situation, knock on wood, you guys have to coordinate and back one another.
I don't want to.
I made it very clear that I won't work with them. I can't be around them. I don't trust them. To me, they don't deserve to wear the uniform, and I'm not safe around them, basically. But in that email, Human Resources told me that from their perspective, they accepted the apology as being sincere. No further disciplinary action would be taken. And because of that, I was just left feeling like I just got stomped all over again. I was like, the trauma continues. And it gets worse because I thought by having Human Resources involved that it would help the matter in holding officers accountable, but it didn't. It made it worse for me.
Made it worse.
Yeah, it made it worse because it just solidified that they can do this and not have any accountability.
I think it's reasonable to assume, your wife, you would have spoken to her about this, as it went on, things like that. I mentioned that she made a lengthy social media post about this recently, where she basically said a lot of what you said. That went around to a few places, and I want to talk about the fallout about that. But the Truro Police Service, they did respond to that. They put out a statement, and then they amended the statement. The initial statement: the Truro Police Service and the town of Truro are aware of social media posts made by members of the public regarding an incident that occurred within the Truro Police Service in June 2024. Despite the situation being posted on social media, the incident was an internal human resource matter. However, given the seriousness of the allegations, there is a need to address the issue publicly. The incident was taken very seriously by the Truro Police Service and the town of Truro. As an immediate step, the Truro Police Service engaged members of the African Nova Scotian community to support the impacted officer and to ensure a cultural lens and appropriate response were considered in addressing the incident. A leader from the Truro African Nova Scotian community led a restorative process where the involved parties came together and acknowledged the impact of the incident. This is along the lines of what you were just saying.
Yep.
This process proposed a pathway forward for all involved. Human Resources within the town of Truro also conducted an internal review of the incident. The impacted officer did not find this resolution satisfactory. You're obviously the impacted officer.
Yes.
The impacted officer then filed a complaint under the Nova Scotia Police Act. To ensure an open and transparent investigation, the Truro Police Service requested a high-ranking African Nova Scotian police leader from an outside police agency conduct this investigation. This was done to ensure the investigation was free of any bias and that an African Nova Scotian lens was applied to the situation. This investigation considered the lived experience of African Nova Scotians, especially in relation to racial issues which are complex and deeply rooted in Nova Scotia's history. This is lengthy. The investigation was taken very seriously, and all relevant evidence and facts were carefully reviewed. This investigation concluded and found the allegation was not sustained, meaning the evidence didn't support that the incident was intentional or motivated by racism or hate. Throughout the process, the impacted officer was given support and his perspective was respected. Members of the Truro African Nova Scotia community who were involved in the restorative approach, the Truro Police Board, and the town of Truro officials were updated and informed throughout the process on the status of the allegation. Now, the initial statement concluded by saying, collectively we acknowledge the impacted officer has been greatly impacted by this incident. And then it also said, intentionally throwing a banana at a person of African descent will never be acceptable. They quickly edited that, at least on their Facebook, and then removed that last sentence that said, intentionally throwing a banana at a person of African descent will never be acceptable. I want to ask you what you make of that edit. But they also mentioned an additional investigation, I guess, that then took place. What can you say about that? You said it was led by, to ensure an open and transparent investigation, the Truro Police Service requested a high-ranking African Nova Scotian police leader from an outside agency, to conduct essentially this investigation. This was done to ensure the investigation was free of any bias and that an African Nova Scotian lens was applied to the situation. The investigation considered the lived experience of African Nova Scotians, especially in relation to racial issues which are complex and deeply rooted in Nova Scotia's history. So, what can you tell me about that? Does that seem accurate? They're saying that it was reviewed even further and that no racism.
That post that was put out by the Truro Police Service, when I read that, I laughed. But I wasn't surprised. I was laughed because I can't believe they had the nerve to mislead the public like that. And what I mean by mislead, I'm not saying that they're lying. I'm saying that they're misleading the public on what actually happened. They talk about members of the African Nova Scotian community being involved. There was one member. So alluding to that, there was a bunch of people involved. That's misleading. The part where they talk about how the matter was taken seriously, I don't think they took it seriously at all.
As you explained.
Yeah. I feel like the whole time I was explaining myself, I was re-victimized by them. I was consistently ignored. They had more impressions of me returning to work than they had to deal with the situation. And the fact about the investigation that the fact that I had to go outside the police department and make a formal complaint to the Nova Scotia Police Complaints Commissioner speaks to the mistrust that I have. The fact that I even had to get to that point, because it didn't have to go that way. It could have been dealt with right then and there. Disciplinary action. Whether that was small or large, none of it happened. This is very hard to talk about because I just can't believe that I'm at this point right now. Like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be telling my story over and over and over again for the police department and the chief to understand the impact that it's had. I think they understand that it's had an impact, but I don't think they understand how deeply that impact is.
And not being, terribly versed in the police policy, what have you, I have to think that it's, maybe against policy to even be speaking to me publicly like this. I have to think that, you're at risk of losing your job, and I have to think that you know that.
Yeah.
But
why are you speaking to me openly like this?
There comes a point where, regardless of what's going on, at the end of the day, you have to do what's right. And I believe what I'm doing is right. I believe telling my story is the right thing to do because people need to be held accountable for their actions. And if I can't hold other officers accountable and to a higher standard, and for them to just basically get away with doing this is unacceptable. This is my workplace. This is my career. And when I'm treated like that in the workplace, the town of Truro has their own policies in place to deal with this issue. They weren't even looked at. I was the only one that brought up policy. I was like, there's already rules in place to deal with these issues within the workplace, regardless if it's police or not. The fact that those weren't even explored, that upset me. And it just showed me a double standard in the police department. And we can't have double standards where one officer is treated differently than the other. We all have rules to follow, and by me speaking my story, if that breaks the rules, then that breaks the rules. But my intentions are clear. My intentions are to bring this to light because this is unacceptable behavior. This conduct is unacceptable on all levels. It was a racial act against me. It has affected my life. It has affected my career. And the fact that this has just been put on the back burner and forgot about and being ignored the whole time just speaks to the bigger issue here, that I'm not supported.
I want to ask you what you make of a few other things. What do you make of the, I guess the external police review that determined it was not racially motivated? What do you make of that and that process? I know we didn't talk about that process.
So that process, I'm still waiting. I'm waiting on a decision to be made on that.
Well, they said that the decision was made.
Yes, so that was the first complaint that I filed with the Nova Scotia Police Complaints Commissioner in Halifax. That's the investigation that they're talking about.
And
they
the
said
conclusion.
they said it was a black investigator.
Yes. And they talk about the outcomes of that, and that outcome was completely misguided. Like it was acknowledging the problem, but at the same time it was contradicted itself in the report. And I took offense to that. I was like, you can't acknowledge the trauma of racial prejudice and discrimination and the historical concept of throwing a banana peel on my personal vehicle as not being a racist act. So because of that, and because of how I've been ignored the entire time, not being updated on the investigations, timelines not being met, that forced me to make a second complaint.
What was the second?
The second complaint was against the Truro Police Service and Chief McNeil.
And I read in one of the many documents that you've also filed a third complaint.
Yes.
What's the nature of that?
So the purpose of the third complaint was that the series of investigations that have taken place, there were numerous issues that I highlighted that need to be looked at in terms of conflicts of interest, in terms of delays and missed deadlines set out by the police commissioner in Halifax. Those decisions are currently being looked at. So I don't know what's going to happen there because I don't have a decision on those.
I feel like we could go another hour on just about that. But there's more to come, I guess.
There's more to come because there's the investigation into the chief and Truro Police Service on how they handled the complaint. I'm awaiting that decision. And my third complaint is the people that investigated these matters and the mistakes that were made in their investigations. That is yet to come as well. So I can't speak on that.
And so again, with the statement that the Truro Police put out, the last line in the initial statement said, "Intentionally throwing a banana at a person of African descent will never be acceptable." People on the Truro Rant and Rave Facebook group pointed out quickly that I believe it was in less than 5 or 10 minutes that was then removed. What do you make of anything of that?
It's hard to cover up a lie. And what I mean by that is that the Truro Police in that statement, they contradicted themselves, basically saying that you can't do that, but it did happen, and the evidence doesn't support it. So nothing was done.
But why put that out and then
I don't
quickly
know.
remove it? As I say, they made that statement in response to a post that your wife made on Facebook. Other people then made comments under that post and additional posts, and this ended up in many different Facebook groups. The admin of one Facebook group, they sent me something that I then learned they sent to you as well. They received a letter from Bertram McDougall, that's a law firm, and I won't read the whole thing, but it says, "I'm a solicitor for the town of Truro. I'm writing you about recent posts on the Truro Rent and Rave Facebook group, which have circulated to many people. The posts are about the town of Truro, the police service, police officers." Basically, I'll use the word threaten her with legal action. And they include screenshots of your wife's posts and some of the other posts that were made. But there's a few interesting things about that. One is that some of these posts weren't even made on that Facebook group, which this person's admin of. Now I've spoken with them briefly. They said that, their legal name is not even the name that they have on Facebook. And this legal document has their Facebook name rather than their legal name. And this was physically sent to their house.
Okay.
And they don't even have their address, listed online or anything like that. And they said, there's numerous other, I think, admins of the same group who, weren't served legal notice, and that, to their knowledge, the person or people who admin the other Facebook group where some of these things were posted, again, not posted in her group, they weren't, served legal notice. And maybe they were, maybe just not to her knowledge. But
Yeah.
what do you mean? This seems like trying to be objective, it seems like a series of unforced errors. Maybe this just speaks to your previous comments. I don't know if you have more thoughts to share about that.
It's a tactic. It's a tactic to try to get people to comply to what they want. And what they want is this not to be talked about. And
if they actually went forward with the legal, like if they were to sue this person, for example, would they then essentially be compelled to talk about it under oath and be asked, about all these things that you've just said? Do you think that they will try to sue? And then be compelled to themselves then speak about
it? They may not.
At this point, I see it as a tactic to use to get people to comply with what they want. And what they want is nobody to talk about it, basically. But if it were to go through to court, they would be obligated to prove that what was being said was completely false at the end of the day. Everything that's being said has to be completely false. And the problem that I have with that is everything that I'm saying right now is my truth. It's my experience. It's what I've witnessed firsthand. So that just, for me, that just shows that they don't want the truth. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear from me. That's what it says to me.
We said a lot. I won't keep you here. Any final thoughts you have to share? Maybe what would you say to, Black people considering becoming police officers who might hear your story and be discouraged from that? What would you say to Black people either living or passing through Truro who, may find themselves in an interaction with members of the Truro Police Service? Or, any final thoughts you have to share? I realize there's a lot we didn't, a lot we covered, a lot we didn't cover. But
I would
I'll
say
leave the last word.
I would say that this incident shouldn't scare anybody.
Yeah, well, some might beg to differ.
Yes.
However, what I would say to everybody is that it's easy to paint all police officers as being the problem. This particular incident has to do with certain officers and the procedures in place. I would say to everybody that this is an incident that happened to me with 2 officers.
One of them a senior ranking,
Yes.
high ranking officer. Yeah.
However, that is their individual actions. And those actions don't represent all the other police officers, because this isn't the entire Truro Police Service as the problem. This is these 2 officers that did this incident and the management team that allowed them to get away with it.
If the management team allows them to get away with it, so that might be,
Yes.
again, to use
That-
your words,
that-
you know,
that-
people
that's
be fearful of that.
That's concerning, yes, but I will tell people that I believe that officers like this are in the minority, and that the majority of police officers that I have worked with, that I've known, both from Truro Police Service and other police services, and including the RCMP, military police, are good officers.
And so you're saying this from personal experience, not just on a
This is personal experience.
And it's important for me to tell people that you do not paint all police officers this way, because it's simply not true. That's not to say that nothing bad happens with police in the public, because it does. But I believe that
Do these actions make it harder, maybe, though, for some of the good officers who maybe then have a legitimate reason to stop somebody, say, with a busted headlight, and then be, you know, faced with belligerence, for example, or something like that?
I think it plays in their minds, yes, that the public is always against them. I know I have gotten that working as a police officer myself, but the difference is, and I say this to people that I have interactions with as a police officer, that I'm not dismissing their previous experience with police at all. But what I am telling them is that in this interaction that I'm having with them, that I'm going to do everything that I can to make it a positive experience. And what I mean by positive is that the interaction is going to go according to the highest standards of what a police officer should be doing and how they are supposed to conduct themselves. So that's the only thing that I can do as a police officer, is let them know that I'm not dismissing your experience, but what I am saying is that this experience between you and I'm gonna try to live up to the high standard that this interaction is going to be a positive interaction, and that you will be treated with fairness and through an equity lens.
And I know I said last question. What would you say to any, you know, I guess, Crown prosecutors who are now having to weigh evidence for, you know, criminal case submitted to them by Constable Cormier or Sergeant Hunka, especially if the accused maybe is disputing some of that? You've painted them to me sort of as untrustworthy police officers, unfit. I mean, maybe you don't feel comfortable giving the prosecutor's advice. I don't know.
Yeah, like I can't speak to that. All I can say is that as a police officer, I have the expectation that through the processes of police work and Crown prosecutors, that everybody that's involved in that process holds themselves to a higher standard, because as police officers and Crown attorneys and lawyers and prosecutors, we're subject to rules and regulations. And it doesn't matter who you are. If you can't meet those high standards on a daily basis, then you don't deserve that position. I have faith in the work that police do. I have faith in the work that Crown prosecutors do. And I believe they all hold themselves to a higher standard until they don't. And if they don't, they need to be held accountable.
I'll leave it at that. Thanks again for talking to me. More to come, I assume.
With the two other investigations, so yeah.